Okay, before we start, I know some people say Impactor. I'm saying Impactor. Okay, let's go. Impactor was constructed cold before the war. He worked as a miner near Nova Point and befriended a fellow mine grunt, Megatron, there. The two became best friends despite their differences, and were together when miners were shipped to Luna 2, where Cybertron's need for energy rose. Impactor thought Megatron's non-violent solutions to Cybertron's class warfare were cute, and reminded him that there would always be a pecking order, no matter how large or small the equation. Megatron's naivety was underscored when the lowly rung was ganged up on by a much larger pair of military cadets and tossed across their table. Impactor, drunk, got up to deal with them the only way he thought mattered. Megatron was put off by the violence and stayed out of the fight, but was arrested anyways. Impactor was taken to the Deltaran medical facility, but not before he'd torn the cadets' legs off and shoved them into the garbage grinder. When Whirl was arrested for the beating he gave Megatron during the latter's brief incarceration, Impactor ended up being his cellmate in Garrus 1. Impactor proceeded to beat on Whirl to the brink of a fade-out, leaving him in critical condition. At some point after the war broke out, Impactor joined the Wreckers, when they were not yet the war heroes that they were known as, but merely a rumor. During this time, he was approached by Prowl, who had formed a partnership with the depraved scientist Mesothulus. In exchange for releasing his friend Roadbuster from prison early, Impactor would take down Mesothulus and destroy everything that they had built together. Clad in a suit of early anti-raid armor, Impactor did just that, shoving the scientist into his own experimental weapon and annihilating Mesothulus's various weapons. Impactor found, however, that neither he nor Prowl could bring themselves to kill Mesothulus's pet project, an artificial Cybertronian named Osteros, or Asteros, however you want to say it, I don't care. Instead, they enlisted him as an Autobot under the name Springer. Impactor and Prowl agreed that Springer would be best off serving under Cup, as neither of them considered themselves to be decent role models for the young bot. He battled Black Shadow in the 11th iteration of the team, under the command of Crest. He would go on to become the leader of the Wreckers in turn, and still holds the record as their longest-serving member to present day. It was he who coined the phrase wreck and rule, while saving Zeron at the Sonic Canyons. He left an impact, get it, on Springer at Sherma Bridge when he took control of the... I'm sorry, I can't get over the fact that TF Wiki wrote he left an impact, sorry. He left an impact on Springer at Sherma Bridge when he took control of a flaming Decepticon shuttle pod by disposing of its headless pilot, landing it safely. The incident would inspire Springer to sign up for the Wreckers' reservists. In a minor incident at the Vosgian Citadel, Impactor also unknowingly inspired Iron Fist to become a major Wreckers fanboy and hagiographer. Much later, Impactor personally approached Springer at Toxic Slug Swamps to recruit him into the 17th lineup of the Wreckers. With his entrance, he took down 8 hidden Decepticons. Springer was impressed, but didn't realize at the time it was all scripted part of the Wreckers' mythology that Impactor never gave him a choice. A different reconciliation of this encounter had Impactor recruit Springer after watching him take down a Decepticon supply drone. When Springer showed up for his first day as a Wrecker with Cup in tow, Impactor and the entire team greeted the two. Impactor poked a little fun at Springer's obvious attachment to Cup, and when the old-timer departed without a word of farewell for the lad, he assured Springer that he'd take care of him. Impactor took Springer under his wing from that point, and the two shared a close bond after the effect he had had on him with his speeches. But during Impactor's leadership as the war got dirtier and dirtier, so did the Wreckers. His Wreckers were barely Autobots at that point. They would abuse prisoners, cause unnecessary pain unto their enemies, and kill Decepticons even when not needed. When Megatron responded with Squadron X, that sent Impactor into a single-minded rage. As any Autobot would, he hated Squadron X. But for him, it was personal, as he saw an echo of the Wreckers in the team. Impactor then proceeded to chase the enemy across 9 star systems, ignoring significant war events such as the Black Epoch, the Samanzi Massacre, the Crucible, and the rise of the Dethroner. He was among the Autobots fighting atop a Decepticon war cruiser during the Battle for Hell's Point, where he picked up the nickname Kiloton for the number of Decepticons he slaughtered during the battle. Over time, his mental state became increasingly unstable, something both his superiors and fellow Wreckers chose to ignore. Impactor was inspired to replace his hand with a harpoon weapon after a run-in with a dimension-hopping freelance peacekeeping agent. If you're wondering who that is, it's Death's Head. You gotta read the comic, but it's Death's Head. After a long string of suicide missions, Impactor became an alarmingly obsessed individual, especially regarding Squadron X, as he felt indirectly responsible for the atrocities that they had committed. As described in Iron Fist's The Wreckers' air attack, Impactor met his old friend Megatron at the Manganese Mountains, where they fought on a drilling platform. Eventually, Impactor lost his hand, chin, and had Megatron's fusion cannon pressed into his head. Before giving him the killing blow, Megatron gave a poetic speech of Impactor's coming to Earth. Even with no power to lift his harpoon, Impactor replied by scratching the words, "Not more poetry," on the platform and gave Megatron pause. That moment, at least, appears to be entirely factual, as Fistatron is unaware of why these random words affected Megatron. In that window of opportunity, Springer used a sky sled to knock Megatron down, sending him to fall thousands of feet into the mountains. After gathering his mouth, Impactor proceeded to inform Springer what they'd have to do in 4 minutes. Save Zeron, rescue Sandstorm from his antimatter duplicate, deactivate Bludgeon's necrocannon, and stop the platform they were on from crashing into a nucleon reactor. Springer was unsure if they could manage all of that in the given time, so Impactor told him that they actually had 2 minutes, but assured him that he had a plan. Years later, Roadbuster would consider this account full of embellishments and fabrications, but said the essence was true. After chasing Squadron X across the galaxy, the Wreckers' rivalry with them came to an end on the planet Pova. The Wreckers found themselves in a bad way after Impactor's first officer, Springer, was trapped under some collapsed rubble. Despite Springer's pleas, Impactor used Springer's own body as a shield against Squadron X's advancing troops, firing through it. This helped turn the tide, and the Wreckers rounded up all of Squadron X for transport off-world. Unfortunately, Prowl told Impactor that Pova was neutral territory, and that he was ordered to set them free or else the Autobots would face diplomatic repercussions. Impactor snapped, and personally executed every member of Squadron X while they were restrained. When the Wreckers were on their way back from Pova, they stopped at Gethsemane. Springer made a call to Autobot High Command and turned Impactor in for the massacre. The mech he talked to had been waiting for the opportunity to arrest Impactor for hundreds of years. Impactor passively detached his harpoon and went without a fight, much to Springer's surprise. Springer testified against Impactor, and the disgraced Wreckers' leader was imprisoned on Garrus 9. A cover story for what happened on Pova was released, which involved Springer suggesting Impactor fire through his torso and Squadron X later escaping their restraints, necessitating their deaths. As extra punishment for refusing to show remorse for what he'd done, Impactor was not granted the mercy of spark removal, and instead was imprisoned normally. In jail, they called him the Autobot that went too far. As Impactor was dragged to his cell, Springer said something that he didn't want to hear, something he would dwell upon for the lengths of his incarceration. Squadron X deserved to die, but that didn't give Impactor the right to kill them. 20 years later, Overlord seized control of G9, and Springer's wreckers were sent to liberate it. Springer was trying hard not to think of Impactor. However, the Decepticon Snare, wanting Overlord gone, released Impactor from his cell in the hopes that he could escape the planet and get help. As the wreckers arrived at G9, a decrepit Decepticon dropship blocked their path. It exploded before their eyes, but not before the battered form of Impactor ejected from the craft. Appearing before the shocked wreckers, Impactor sneered, requesting to be let on board. He filled the new wreckers in on the situation and how he'd escaped, while continuing to clash with Springer. He not only refused to recognize that his former soldier was now in charge, he snarled that he used to think Springer would have done the same thing that Impactor did himself on Pova, and was now sickened that Springer wouldn't. Conflict aside, Springer knew Impactor was needed for the mission. Given a new harpoon, he was placed in Springer's drop team and deployed to G9, and he recognized, with visible glumness, the name of their secondary objective, Aquatus. Descending towards G9 in 2 ejected escape pods, they met with the tough Decepticon resistance. Despite their maneuvering, Impactor's ship was the first to go down, though the other wasn't far behind. After their crash landing, Impactor led them towards where the Autobot prisoners were being held. Cell Block G was directly below him, best he recalled, but Twin Twist's drilling only sent them tumbling into a large empty chamber. At the bottom, Impactor found the twisted remains of Kickoff, whom he regarded as one of the few guards who treated G9 prisoners with respect. Their presence in the chamber signaled G9's defenses, and after he, Springer, and Twin Twist were electrocuted, they woke up strapped to tables in the care of Stalker. A sadist, Stalker grabbed his tools and tortured and gleefully went to work on them. Unlike Springer and Twin Twist, Impactor had grown used to the Decepticons' method in the time since the takeover of G9, so he alone managed to stay online during Stalker's work. Twin Twist was looking terribly mangled, and Springer had just woken up when he and Impactor began talking about their murky past. Impactor accused Springer of betraying the Wreckers, with the testimony against him, while Springer was surprised to learn that Impactor still had no remorse for what he'd done. So long as Impactor refused to realize that he had done wrong, their feelings were at an impasse. Stalker returned with a new torture device, but his work on Twin Twist was interrupted when his brother, Topspin, sacrificed his own life elsewhere, extinguishing both sparks. Disappointed, Stalker turned his attentions to Impactor, but was again interrupted. Cup, Guzzle, and the turncoat Decepticon Snare blasted into Stalker's lair. Snare was mortally wounded in the following skirmish, and Stalker was killed. As Snare lay dying, Impactor questioned him, wondering why he, the Decepticon, had saved them. Snare told them that Overlord was on his way and asked that he himself be killed, which Impactor did curtly before Snare could finish his last words. True to Snare's last warning, Overlord arrived with a boom. Unknown to them elsewhere, the other half of the Wreckers had completed their objective by hacking the supercomputer judge, Aquatus, and downloading it into Iron Fist's brain. They were surrounded by Decepticons, whom they could easily deal with if they simply signaled all the deterrence chips in their heads, killing them. But they knew this would also kill Impactor, who was also an ex-prisoner, and so his and their fate came to a vote. Perceptor voted for killing him for the sake of many. Pyro voted against. And Iron Fist, Impactor's greatest fanboy and new host to Aquatus' judgment of Impactor, came to the sad realization that his hero very much deserved to die. Fortunately for Impactor and the Wreckers, Verity Carlo convinced the others to spare Impactor. After Overlord pulled Guzzle apart and used the pieces to put Cup down, Impactor removed Overlord's eye with his harpoon. In response, Overlord stomped Impactor into the ground, forcing him offline. When Impactor came to, Overlord had been reduced to a flaming skeleton facing only the fragile Verity Carlo. Impactor blasted Overlord's arm off and attacked him, but Overlord had lost the will to fight, as he'd learned that Megatron had perished, robbing Overlord of his final showdown with him. Overlord beckoned Impactor to kill him, but Impactor refused. In honor of Springer, whom Impactor thought had died, the former Wreckers commander promised that Overlord would serve trial as a criminal, and himself finally came to terms with the crimes that he committed on Pova. Impactor was pardoned in exchange for his help in retaking Garrus 9, and he immediately left for parts unknown on a shuttle with the repaired Guzzle. But things did not go well for the new pair. Guzzle became increasingly violent and obsessed with racking up a body count, something that struck Impactor too close to home, and which got him captured in a rescue mission against the Decepticon harvesters. The fact Impactor cared about Guzzle and the alien hostages enough to rescue them was a sign that he was improving. But when the hostages were killed, Impactor allowed himself to succumb to the bloodlust once more, realizing to his horror that he could not escape it. Eventually, Impactor balked and had Guzzle imprisoned at Debris for butchering prisoners, something that a raging Guzzle felt was hypocritical. All Impactor could do now was while away his days with Roadbuster, lamenting the state of the Wreckers and their lack of purpose. Roadbuster comforted Impactor by pointing out that he didn't join the killing and was trying to care for a comrade. Such caring was a point of contention between the two, as Impactor felt it was wrong for his teammate to keep Springer alive. After years of no mental activity, he tried to drag Debris Administrator Hubcap into the debate. Shortly after, Springer did in fact regain consciousness, just in time for the Wreckers to be gathered once again to try and rescue the captured Prowl. On Earth, Impactor and the Wreckers found Prowl's old collaborator RC hunting for him, after he went missing en route to Verity Carlo and her copy of the Equatus Data Slug. When a rabbit stole the data slug, Impactor and Guzzle took off after the creature, but soon encountered several Chimericons, robots in disguise as Earth creatures. While Guzzle took on Polar Claw, Carnivac disabled Springer with his paralyzing outlier ability. Impactor came to Springer's aid, and Carnivac introduced himself as the leader of Mayhem, a rogue group intent on toppling the corrupt power structures created by the Autobots and Decepticons alike. Carnivac extended an offer to the team to join them, being familiar with Impactor's reputation as a maverick. Impactor refused, particularly unimpressed with Carnivac's indifference when Guzzle killed Polar Claw right in front of them. Carnivac departed, and Impactor and the recovered Springer were left to handle the raging Guzzle, who had ingested some of Polar Claw's spilled fuel and was being hideously mutated by its effects. Rendezvousing with the others nearby as they took on more members of Mayhem, Impactor and Springer let Guzzle loose on the massive Chimericon known as Tidal Wave. Surmising that Prowl was being held inside him, Springer led a squad into Tidal Wave as Impactor, Cup, and Guzzle remained outside to draw fire and divert their other attackers. Becoming stuck in mid-transformation, Tidal Wave was ordered to retreat. Impactor was intent on following, but Cup elaborated on the mind link Prowl had installed in him, eliciting an angry response. Cup forwarded a message Prowl sent through it, and upon hearing a mention of the noise maze, Impactor immediately knew who they were dealing with, filling him with dread. Without wasting any time, he told Cup they must return to Debris. Once they were back on the space station and with guzzles recharging, Impactor began digging up his own pre-made grave in the wrecker's mausoleum. He explained to Cup what the noise maze was, and the two brainstormed a method of countering the pocket dimension's mind-warping effects. Impactor then revealed he had hidden a gate to the noise maze in his grave. With Tarantulas now holding the other wreckers prisoner along with Prowl, Impactor prepared a rescue plan. He had to knock Cup out cold in order for the old-timer to send a warning message to Prowl through their mind link. Impactor then used his long-hidden gate to breach the noise maze with debris itself, intending to destabilize the entire dimension with the massive space station. He made sure Cup and Guzzle understood the plan, and the three tooled up, leaping into battle with Mayhem's Chimericons, who Tarantulas fielded to defend him. The giant tidal wave breached the noise maze as well, exacerbating its collapse as Impactor singled out Carnivac for a one-on-one fight. Carnivac again attempted to seduce Impactor to his side, but Impactor wasn't having it, gaining the upper hand in their scuffle. However, the two were forced to stop when the towering tidal wave loomed over them, intent on getting in on some of this action. Impactor found himself solidly punted by tidal wave's massive foot straight into Tarantulas' lair at the heart of the noise maze, known as Tor. Inside, Impactor watched from the shadows as Prowl leveled a gun at the traitorous hubcap, intent on silencing him and protecting the sensitive data the communications specialist had acquired. Prowl was ultimately swayed not to shoot hubcap, but Impactor felt keeping the traitor around was too great of a security risk, and that the deaths of his comrades would have been for nothing if that data was leaked. Shooting hubcap through the chest, he cynically declared that guys like Prowl would always have someone like Impactor around to do their dirty work when they faltered. Soon the escaped Springer and the others caught up to them, and Impactor took responsibility up front for eliminating hubcap. Noticing that Roadbuster was missing from the group, Impactor immediately knew what that meant for his old comrade and took a moment with Springer to lament the loss of their friend. The group began to hatch a plan to destroy the noise maze and Tor for good, hitting upon the idea of forcing Tidal Wave to transform. The gravimetric crunch of such a massive transformer doing so would destabilize the maze to a critical point, and Impactor suggested adding the superfuel Obtentium into the mix. The team headed to the room with the main Obtentium supply stored in a giant column, and Impactor and Springer immediately moved to pilfer some and lay explosives to destroy the rest. Tarantulas appeared before the group, the giant spider growing further in size and initiating a contraction of the Tor so he could escape with his experiments intact. As the others engaged him, Springer weighed their options and told Impactor to get the rest out as he ensured the destruction of Tarantulas' lair. Impactor protested, but Springer gave Impactor the order to remotely blow the charges if he was unable to escape in time. Impactor harpooned over the giant tarantulas as Springer and RC cut the web the spider was perched on. Tarantulas prevented himself from falling by growing yet larger and grabbed Verity, but Impactor and the others quickly wrested her free from the spider's clutches. Impactor took a moment to reveal that he was the one who originally chucked Mesothulus into the noise maze, not Prowl, as Tarantulas had first assumed. Learning this, Tarantulas came to the conclusion that Prowl hadn't done away with Ostros either, and demanded to know what had happened to his beloved creation. After hearing Springer's voice signal, Impactor, and noting a meaningful look between Impactor and Prowl at this, Tarantulas instinctively realized that Ostros was in fact present at the moment and moved to reunite with him. Impactor ordered Prowl and Verity out of the Tor as RC intercepted Tarantulas and sliced his giant spider head off. Impactor then used the decapitated head to halt the Tor's contraction via Tarantulas' retinal scanner. After Prowl and the others outside successfully got tidal wave juiced up on obtentium and forcefully transformed, the noise maze began to violently collapse. The decapitated tarantula suddenly recovered and leaped down from the obtentium column before Impactor and RC could stop him. Impactor wanted to pursue, but received another message from Springer, ordering him to stay the course and follow his last command. RC reassured the torn Impactor that Springer knew what he was doing, and the two exited the tour, with Impactor's choosing to have faith in his former subordinate. Once outside, Springer's signal stopped, and a sorrowful Impactor ultimately had to blow the charges and destroy the tour. Jumping aboard debris, Impactor and RC found a wrathful Guzzle preparing to execute Prowl and Cup, and Impactor was forced to neutralize his former companion with a harpoon through the head. Thankfully, Prowl insisted on going back into the collapsing noise maze one last time, and a surviving Springer was successfully rescued, much to Impactor's relief. In the aftermath, Impactor decided to take Carnivac up on his offer to join Mayhem, and the two began to plot the group's future. Impactor was mistakenly remembered to be in queue to board the Lost Light before its maiden launch by Red Alert. When Cup was equipped with a rocket pack for travel to the moon, he stated in elation, "If only Impactor and the guys could see me now." Impactor would feature in Thundercracker's screenplay, generically portrayed as an Autobot thug who helped beat up Scrounge alongside Ultra Magnus and Ironhide. As Impactor and Carnivac pushed forward with their plans for Mayhem, Impactor began to take the leading role in the organization, much to Carnivac's chagrin. They concocted a scheme to ruin human/Cybertronian relations by framing an Autobot for murdering a prominent human politician. To that end, Impactor reformatted his alternate mode and went undercover in the President of the United States motorcade. Carnivac used his absence to reassert his own authority over Mayhem and went forward with their frame-up plan without Impactor's knowledge, spitefully choosing Springer as the Autobot they would utilize. Having gotten an invitation from Springer to talk in the wake of Cup's death, Impactor stumbled upon Carnivac's plot in motion. Carnivac used his outlier powers to control Springer like a puppet and assassinate the politician Megan Giglione. Giglione. You think I would know that one. However, Megan turned out to be Overlord in disguise, using Tarantulas' Chimericon tech to assume a human form. Overlord revealed himself and attacked Springer, forcing the other undercover members of Mayhem present to intervene. Impactor arrived on the scene to find his Mayhem colleagues slaughtered, and Overlord fleeing after taking Verity Carlo prisoner. Tending to the paralyzed Springer, Impactor called Carnivac out of hiding, furious that things had spiraled so far out of control. Carnivac, weakened from controlling Springer, tried to explain himself, but Impactor did not want his excuses. Impactor told him that they would return to their base so both Carnivac and Springer could recover, and then Carnivac would die at Impactor's hands. Back at Mayhem's base, Impactor put Springer in a CR chamber and kept vigil over him. Suddenly, the enraged Triple Changer woke up and burst out of the chamber, throttling Impactor and blaming him for the situation. Impactor tried to shift the blame to Carnivac, and when the former Decepticon entered the room, Impactor slugged him and demanded answers. Carnivac revealed the full extent of Impactor's involvement in Mayhem's frame-up plan, much to Springer's horror, although Impactor protested that it wasn't supposed to be Springer who would be the fall guy. Springer buried the disgust he was feeling at the moment, intending to track down and rescue Verity from Overlord. He looked to Impactor for support, and guilt-stricken, Impactor chose to accompany him. The two found Verity in the company of not only Overlord but Tarantulas, with whom Overlord had formed an alliance. Impactor nailed Overlord's left eye with a wired harpoon shot and engaged the Phase Sixer as Springer confronted Tarantulas and ensured Verity's safety. Overlord tossed Impactor down a deep crevasse in Tarantulas' new lair, but the falling Impactor managed to tangle Overlord's leg up with another harpoon shot. Springer slammed into Overlord and sent the three tumbling down into the darkness, with Overlord's firepower collapsing some of the surrounding rock on top of them. Buried in rubble and separated from Overlord at the moment, Impactor took the time to briefly reminisce about how he and Springer first met. Impactor acknowledged that Cup was the reason Springer became such a good person, and admitted it might have been better if he never brought Springer into the murky world of the Wreckers at all. Suddenly, the recovered Overlord began to approach, and Impactor told Springer he had one last thing to do as a Wrecker: reenact what happened on Pova between them, but with the roles reversed. Springer was to shoot through the still-trapped Impactor for a surprise attack on Overlord. When the unsuspecting Phase Sixer stood before his pinned prey and smugly asked for some last words, Impactor only had one response: wreck and rule. Springer fired through his friend's chest, stunning Overlord and knocking him over before bursting through Impactor's flaming wreckage in vehicle mode, heading back up to Verity with a furious Overlord in pursuit. Springer ruefully eulogized Impactor by calling him a willy old buzzard.